where this conversation around, we often hear trans inclusive, trans affirmative, and it's it's almost a something that's done versus an active doing. And so we talked a lot about um, what the difference is between inclusive or affirmative versus something affirming. And so the term inclusive is commonly used to describe the school climate that we want to create. But a commitment to inclusion often translates into celebrating and representing diversity without necessarily addressing the roots of systemic oppression and specifically trans marginalization. So you think about things like Pink Shirt Day or any kind of like one-off day that celebrates a particular community, without necessarily going further to do that work and address the system. So what we push for in this report and in this particular module is creating an affirming school climate, which tackles these root causes of systemic oppression. So it's about creating environments where certain identities are not seen as the norm or standard against which all others are compared. So when we talk about cissexism, cisnormativity, that's kind of what that is what we're getting at. So these environments lead to othering, which results in trans students being seen as exceptional, whereas an affirming approach sees all gender identities as equally valid and normal. So within our toolkit, we give some examples of what this looks like in practice. So we have a great chart that resembles this one here, inclusive versus affirming, in terms of pronoun usage or in terms of washroom access, what inclusive washroom access looks like versus affirming washroom access. And also trans affirming approaches in curriculum. There's an inclusive approach and then there's an affirming approach that keeps in mind the systemic piece. So this approach is proactive in its acknowledgement of systems that marginalize trans and gender diverse folks. And it's actively, that word is key, confronting systemic barriers that otherwise go unquestioned, unconsidered, or unacknowledged. Even when one individual trans student seeks accommodation to fit within a cisgender normative system, the system remains in place. It's just these individualized accommodations that are actually being looked at. And so that's kind of how we're excavating the differences between those two in this particular module. And it gives you a lot of ways of thinking about what systemic pieces are in place and capacity and entry points to disrupt and try to turn things around a little bit through an affirming approach. Speaking to that accommodation piece, on a fundamental level,